And we are live. Good to see you today, my EOS podcast friends, my EOSwriter podcast friends, everyone involved here. Also, if you hear this smooth sound coming through your ears these days, it's because Scott, we have a sound engineer who's part of the team with EOS podcast team here. And Scott's been doing awesome stuff with the sound. And he also is a developer. Check out hybrid.games, which is Scott's project. It's pretty epic, actually, if you go check it out, hybrid.games. So anywhere, there's a quick plug, EOS podcast. We have David Packham, the one and only, the legendary man himself from Chintai, EOS42, the guardian of the blockchain, one of the guardians of the blockchain here. So David, welcome to the show. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, Brandon. Thanks for having me again. It's been about a year, I think, since you and I last were on the podcast together, and it's been a hell of a year. As we come up to the 1 year anniversary. So yeah, I'm the co-founder of EOS42, one of the block producers, or currently just outside the producer zone. And also we founded a project called Shinty, which is a token leasing platform and is expanding now out into non-EOS related tokens and non-fungible tokens in the gaming sector. So we got some exciting things going on from the project on that side of things. And yeah, everything's just been a phenomenal first 11 months, really. I couldn't really be happier about how well things have gone for us on a personal level. And I think for the look at the progress the community have collectively made, it's been huge. And so I think we should definitely take this opportunity on the 1 year anniversary to give ourselves a little bit of a pat on the back about how well we've done. Because if you look at other projects in that time, I don't think anybody's done as much collectively.
Yeah, I mean, it's been going absolutely insane. We're getting close to 100 shows on the EOS podcast now. It's been about 14 months. I started maybe 15 months, a few months before mainnet. But yeah, and every show I've just been kind of had my jaw dropping, like, my God, people are building so fast. So yeah, big pat on the back to everyone who's been working on this. Chintai is really interesting. I'm excited to get into that because, just since that has developed, there's been a lot going on there. The Chex token sales going on right now, auction, and a lot going on there. So we're going to get in kind of the dynamics of that, but let's talk about a little bit of general EOS first. What do you think is the most interesting thing going on in EOS or EOSIO right now is?
Well, I'll tell you what, I think the one probably on most viewers' mind right now is Block One unstaking 9.8 million tokens today. Yeah, so that's bound to be the moment for them. I thought they did a very good job of I think Dan made a statement just saying, look, don't worry guys, we're not selling the EOS or anything like that. So it kind of reminds me of Novogratz coming out to explain why they made that disposal on some Block One shares on their side, because everyone starts jumping to conclusions of thinking, oh, what does it mean, this or that? So yeah, I think it's that's probably the big one right now. What do you think it means?
I'm hoping that it has something to do with URI. We've had these hints from Dan saying that the best form of adoption you could possibly have, or the best marketing you could possibly have for EOS, would be some sort of universal resource inheritance, some sort of social media site where people are getting basically paid to use it. I think that would be exciting just because it would throw such a giant wild card out there. Like, if the June 1st event was something around that, that would just be exciting and fun because of the possibility of adoption.
Certainly would. I mean, it's what is it? It's about $60 million worth of tokens there. So it all depends what they plan to do with it. I mean, you're right. So in theory, it could be a range of things. They were very non-specific about it, but certainly one thing I think most people would hope is that they, as the biggest stakeholder in the network right now, would hopefully start to take some action. I think in terms of maybe some participation in the voting as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that'd be interesting. They still pull a lot of weight as far as voting. I mean, they could definitely kind of reorganize the structure a little bit as far as maybe some of the block producers that are doing a lot that have fallen out of the top 30, or that have been lingering on the top 30. EOS42 recently out of the top 30, and there's some teams like Cypherglass, which is some of these teams that are doing a lot of things that have fallen down the ranks a little bit. So Yeah,
Yeah, there's an interesting one. I've listened to some really good commentary over the last probably the last couple of weeks on this, because there's some quite widely varying views about this. One school of thought says this is terrible. These are really good teams, and they should be in the top 21 for some reason, or as a producer. And others are more pragmatic about this, and they're giving some really good alternative perspective on this. For example, these are stakeholders in the network who own the tokens, who are choosing to come in and start voting for the first time, and they're making decisions based on their best judgment of what's in their own best interests. So not always necessarily it's going to be aligned with the network fully. But again, then it all feeds back into this whole idea of, in an ecosystem of multiple EOS.io chains, that's going to be a healthy moment, I think, when we get that, because the competition between the networks should increase over time, and that will I think feed into token holder behavior, including things like voting like this as well, and how they vote, and who are the custodians that they elect to make those decisions on the network on their behalf as block producers and so on. But it's certainly interesting seeing the community have a big debate about this, and certainly a lot of people, I think, have got some open voicing of concerns around it right now.
Mm-hmm. So do you know where the extra voting power came from, or where where this shift in the network came from?
I mean, the best theory, I suppose, that I've heard, the one that makes the most sense actually, is that it was the conversion event opportunity that took place during EOS's drop way down to $1.50. Do you remember that? In about, was it January, February? And if you actually look at the charts, it wasn't so much the price of that made it a good conversion opportunity event in dollars. It was the fact that it went relatively incredibly cheap versus Bitcoin and Ethereum at that moment. So at that moment, I think there was potential for a lot of big crypto holders who missed the boat in the ICO to say, this is our moment to jump and get, diversify out somewhat of Bitcoin and Ethereum, for example, and take a meaningful stake in that. And particularly if they were, for example, mining teams and so on and so forth, they may have seen that as their moment to buy some stake in, to start getting involved in the community and the ecosystem. So it could well be that that's what we're now seeing feeding through as a result of that. That's certainly one theory I've heard, and it certainly makes sense. I don't for 1 minute buy that it's anything really to do with the introduction of the EUA, because although that didn't outlaw certain practices relating to vote trading and other things like that, that kind of thing was really going on anyway before that anyway, and that was one of the criticisms of putting in a rule that wasn't entirely enforceable anyway. So I don't think that's certainly the other one, and I also don't think that the introduction of the Rex in itself has made any differences there either. That's brought in some additional voters as well, but really from the way we're looking at the way that the Rex proxies behaving, I don't think that's led to these changes. So it seems to be the best theory.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It doesn't seem like the Rex has had some big sweeping change, and that makes sense. That's kind of the free market at work right there with a drop in price. Some people, that makes a ton of sense. Some people finally getting the chance again to diversify into EOS, and also that's a great opportunity because of the fact they got to watch it for almost a year and kind of vet what's going on, and then kind of get in. That makes sense, actually.
The Rex itself was quite a valuable addition to the network, but I think its impact will be properly felt from an economic point of view out in the future, because what it's done is it's provided a single huge liquidity pool that the businesses will be able to draw on whenever they need, ongoing in the future. So it's really now provides a means for businesses to not even need to hold EOS ongoing themselves anymore. They can just lease super cheaply with a high degree of certainty relating to those prices staying super low. So in other words, it's going to make it very, very cheap for people to do business on EOS long term, which is really what you need when you're building a commercial chain. You don't want that risk of price fluctuations causing those problems. So and it's really been interesting because it did what I expected by putting the fees into the Rex as well. It gave an effective artificial floor into the the supply pool, which meant that people had no choice but to move all their tokens that were maybe being leased out on Chintai across onto the Rex because you can get a superior return. But it hasn't actually increased CPU usage. If you actually look, there's a huge amount of liquidity in the pool. Most of it's not really being utilized for CPU leasing at this stage, but that's good. It shows the capacity, in effect, of the network that we have just sitting there ready to be used when it's required. And for Shintai, that's kind of fine because we've long been looking beyond just these EOS CPU leasing anyway. So it kind of validated the fact that, yes, we're making the right decision for the application to look bigger and look beyond this. And, we have the DAP Network from Liquid Apps, which is a big one that's going to completely change the way that I think a lot of resourcing works. And we've got that coming. And with that means DAP leasing will be coming. And then there's a range of other projects too that we're going to be supporting. Pixios is a recent one that's just been announced. And the focus then for us and then moves on to the NFT space as well, but we can maybe come on to all that a little later on.
Yeah, I mean, there's such. I was looking at your roadmap for Shintai, and it is definitely, it's cool how it goes away from just the EOS main chain. It goes down the road into the side chains, all of EOS.io, and then outside of EOS or EOS.io completely. So there's a big opportunity there, which is cool for the whole space. And when you mentioned, just going back a little bit, because I had this thought of when you mentioned people kind of getting into EOS at the lower price, I was just picturing like kind of this Game of Thrones type of, there's all this maneuver going on, which is so just interesting within the EOS blockchain or the EOS.io and all of crypto. And this constant maneuvering, you never really know what's going to come out on top. And so the diversifying of the chain with the sister chains is such a, it's kind of like this safety valve for us. We don't really need to know what's going to happen or who's going to win as long as the competition stays,
So yeah, I agree with you on that. So what people need to understand about the design of EOS.io itself is, of course, that it's designed to be multiple chains interconnected as part of its scaling. So therefore, you can actually look at any one chain as becoming increasingly less and less important in the context of the whole. Not to say its value won't continue to increase as the whole network's value does, but the network will cease to be one chain. It will be multiple chains. And that's great because it gives people with differing philosophies on how they wish to interact with one another, how they wish to govern a network together, and so on, to form communities that don't necessarily need to be as diverse as a global community, in much the same way as, San Francisco, for example, and London have different cultures, different practices. They have a lot in common. They trade a lot with each other in a variety of different ways, but they're actually self-contained in one sense as well. And I do think in many ways those individual chains are going to interact in a similar fashion. There'll be a degree of competition, intertrade in effect in a seamless manner that people won't really be aware of. And I think that might well be, the future we start to see. And it's good because it means that none of us need to sit here worrying unduly about any particular issues on any one chain over time. Mm-hmm. And I think that'll become apparent. At the moment we are just very focused on the first really big implementation of EOS itself, but it's good what's happening right now on the network because it's forcing us all to look at different aspects that are maybe working or not working as well as we would like, and it's going to enable us to all consider what we as individuals want to participate in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just I was listening to someone was talking about Bitcoin, and they were talking about Bitcoin Cash, BSV, and then they said they look at all of them as Bitcoin. And then with the halvening coming up, there's going to be kind of competition with the miners, and they may have to kind of choose a chain and orphan the others almost to stay in the profit. I was thinking that the foresight when EOS.io was built to have these sister chains that are all kind of one growing organism, almost. It was so big. I mean, that was such an intelligent idea because when you see Bitcoin just they're kind of finally coming to that realization that you need to be dynamic, but it's going to, as Bitcoin halves and halves, they're going to have to pick chains. With EOS.io, there doesn't need to necessarily be this culminating event where people need to pick a chain. It can continue to grow and go, the competition can be sustained and continue to iterate. So I think that's one of the really exciting overlooked parts of EOS.io is this, this example. And Telos is a really cool specific example because they're doing the worker proposals and things that people maybe wanted to see on EOS.io, but it was or on EOS, but it was maybe not a good time to try it. So
no, I agree. What I like most about the Telos community is the way they have been bold enough to try some very different things from the outset as part of the design of the network. They didn't just look at EOS and say, all right, well, we didn't get necessarily in and weren't as successful as VPs as we'd have wished. A lot of the founding teams did run, but then didn't work out for them. That actually, I don't think was the underlying driver anyway. But it was good because they looked at it and said, well, these are things we don't like. We're seeing already on the early mainnet. So these are things we're going to identify as problems. And the other example you give is the worker proposal system. So we have never completed a successful worker proposal and funded something on the network for EOS, even though that was always part of the premise, was the way that the network would self-fund using its resources. Hence the whole point of the EOS.io saving account was to be there for that saving for investment back into the network in ways that individuals couldn't necessarily afford. And the equivalent of sort of government open expenditure on your infrastructure, right? Now, what's interesting is that by seeing a working version of that, along with things like proper enforcement of block producers who underperform, being taken out of their position and unregistered, that's great to see because we're now seeing an alternative configuration work, and we'll be able to all assess over time, is that actually better? Is that something therefore the mainnet ought to be adopting? And then of course there's the other side of it, which is if the mainnet chooses not to adopt it, it may end up finding it's not as competitive in the long term. So that will be a choice that token holders need to effectively enforce by a combination of their own opinions, proxy voting, and literally being very involved in deciding who they vote for. So hopefully over time, I think this will all start to work through on the mainnet as much as all the other chains.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's transition into talking about Shintai a little bit. This is one of the really cool things that's been going on, and that it's been growing so much lately. I mean, it's been like a month since I kind of dug in and looked at what was going on, and there's a lot of things I hadn't realized. So why don't you give an overview of maybe what are the features of Shintai right now?
So right now, what you still see, although it's about there is a Shintai 1.0, which the original premise of it was to unlock the capability for token holders to realize passive income as an ongoing source for their token utility. And the token utility is your CPU and net rights in a nutshell. So from day one, we looked to build something for the community that we thought was going to be needed on any of the EOS chains, and that was to build some sort of leasing exchange that enable people to trade that bandwidth back and forth as required, and auto assign it and auto renew it and make it a fire and forget type service over time as we built it out. And it, as it turned out, it was fortuitous of us to start the planning of that as early as we did, because when we deployed it in October, we had that CPU boom just kicking off, and the usage of Chintai went through the roof from launch right through until really the start of this year. And so that was good for us, I think, to see that, yes, the platform was as scalable as we designed it to be. It handled massive volumes at its peak. But then it's also been interesting seeing, for us, it was the eye-opener was looking beyond this one single token use case, which was to say, well, if EOS is being designed as a token for you to be able to delegate your utility to someone else, what does that mean for other tokens that don't currently necessarily have that functionality designed into them but could? And the answer is actually mind-blowing when you consider it. It's the idea that you can separate out your ownership and your utility on a token, and actually therefore realize not just your ownership appreciation or depreciation based on the token price. You can actually, as the network gets more valuable and the demand for whatever that token gives you rights to, because in theory every token should have utility for it to be have a purpose. that ultimately there is a whole potential world out here of thousands of tokens with the ability to generate income for the holders. So we started to look at that, and we started to think about what Chintai as an engine could do for that. And that's how we started to realize that finally we therefore had a need for a token model within Chintai itself. So we deliberately didn't put one in for the launch of Chintai itself, because we could never find a justification. And I'm certainly a big believer in not having tokens just for the purpose of it. But here, we needed a base token for interconversion in particular, and facilitating conversion efficiency. So what does that practically mean? That means that in a world where you, for example, Brandon, say, well, I'm a Bitcoin holder. And yeah, I quite like the idea of getting into a range of different leasing markets and realizing these returns. And some of them are going to be, as much as 20, 30%, and some of them are going to be very low and only about 2 or 3%. So which ones do I go into? Well, you as a holder might make your mind up and look at that and say, well, the reason these are a higher return is because the actual tokens themselves quite volatile. Maybe they lose value and the project isn't that good. So to lease out the utility, you'd have to pay a lot, or maybe there's just no demand at all on certain projects. But for others, where they're very stable and or they're a good token to be holders over any period of time, you've got the inverse. You can effectively say, well, in that case, you don't even need to pay that much in terms of interest, because holders of that token tend to get a capital appreciation over time anyway. So in effect, therefore, what you're able to do with Chintai, or will be able to, is with this new iteration, is be able to pick out a series of markets that you wish to be exposed to, and it will auto convert you via Chex as a base conversion across as required to fill the demand for leasing in all these different types of markets. So you might take 10 Bitcoin, have them divided out across into 1,000 different token markets to find the places of highest return, and it will generate out you continuous passive income, conversion back to Chex, conversion back out into whatever other tokens, and it'll start just generating you more and more and more income on an ongoing basis. And at some point then, obviously, you might want to then exit back out, and actually, you don't even need to exit back out into Bitcoin. Could be into EOS, could be into Ethereum, could be into fiat further down the line. So we're looking ahead at this potential future market where these fungible tokens, like the likes of EOS, like the DAP token and the Lumios network and so on, where people are going to want to continuously generate the highest passive income sources they can as part of the crypto like this being part of your portfolio. So that in itself is a compelling driver that's driving the project forward and building out and turning that model into a reality. It's also going to mean that that there are numerous projects that are adding leasing capabilities in directly off the back of this vision. The DAP Network is one, Lumios is another, for example, and Pixios are already looking at it as well from the perspective of digital assets and leasing. So that's one big side of the project. The other, which is a hot area in this space anyway, is NFTs. So the non-fungible token space, it primarily comprises of things like the gaming sector itself. And in terms of what that practically means, well, it's really looking at things like the skins market in the gaming sector and how much money is flowing around in these grey markets right now. And there is an opportunity for both the gaming companies themselves and the users to actually start using these and trading back and forth and making real world money in these digital items. So there is a massive, massive multi-billion-dollar market out there ready to be unlocked. Now, what goes hand in hand with trading of NFTs, of course, is leasing of NFTs as well. So the DGoods standard, for example, is being built out, as is Simple Assets is another. And I think both of those are looking ahead at the potential of being able to lease digital assets as well. So such that, for example, you're a gamer and you say, well, I'm going to go away now on a 2-week vacation. I might as well lease out my sword and access to my dragon. And, you can have them on this variety of different criteria. You can use the sword for ceremonial purposes, but you can take the dragon out into battle. And these are the prices for them. And you just park them out, and the service will service these gaming companies and markets to actually enable them to actually find the buyers and sellers, peer-to-peer match them, and off you go. So this all, again, feeds into the Chex model as well. it's kind of, what's interesting about a space like this is I think everybody can see the massive potential of it. What we're yet to be able to see clearly, any of us, is exactly how these markets are going to evolve. So how are gaming companies and gamers going to want to interact? Nobody fully yet knows the dynamics of that. It's a bit like looking at the social media world before the likes of MySpace and then Facebook and Twitter, and trying to speculate, I wonder how people socialize on the internet in the future. We've got these bulletin boards right now, which are kind of cool, and I can post messages and someone can see it, a bit like a kind of glorified version of Craigslist. But I wonder what people will do in the future. And of course, if people had even had these visions of YouTube, podcasts, and so on and so forth, and Reddit, and it's mind-blowing when you look at the diversity of the way this has come out. And I think the NFT space has similar evolution ahead of it, and it's going to be fascinating, therefore, for us to see. The really great news about that is EOS is prime place to be a part of that, and crypto in itself as well, because I think this is one of going to be the big first use cases that really shows the credibility of crypto in itself, because it's absolutely essential for tokenization to work.
Yeah, it's this continuing blurring of the lines kind of between the digital world and the real world, especially when you start getting these assets that can live in the digital world in the same way they live in the real world. All those things that you can do with some sort of collectible item or some sort of useful item in the real world, you kind of just picture being able to do that in the same way in the digital world. So, you were talking about video games, and if I needed to go on some quest and there's this impossible boss at the end and I can only beat it with this one sword, maybe I just go find that sword to lease it out just for this quest, and then that's all I need it for. It changes.
It's absolutely.
Yeah.
But you see, and I agree with you. So there's the functional utility ones like that, which are you can kind of see how the markets are going to work with that, which is I'm really focused on trying to, achieve something in a game or a virtual environment of some sort. But then actually you get the more kind of blingy ones as well. So people like to have fun with this stuff too. So, sometimes they'll pay a fortune for something just that looks good on their character and so on and so forth. So that's why the idea of Pixios embracing this space is so compelling. Because actually, if you think about what art is, it is an asset in whatever form it is, and if it can be uniquely owned and accessible in some form. The idea, for example, that Pixios deploy a virtual art gallery in the high fidelity world when it launches, and that will have a currency linked to the EOS.io space as well. You imagine it, right? You're going to be able to go out and lease pieces of work, your artwork as an artist, that people can borrow and put in their virtual shops or casinos that they've set up in this digital world. You imagine we'll have all moved off Telegram by that point, and it will be in the equivalent of some sort of Cantina episode of Star Wars where we're all just sitting around gambling and talking over a drink and so on and so forth. And it's interesting because I think that's the kind of evolution ahead we have to start thinking about, which is we are where we are now, but where are we going? And what is actually out there around the corner in the future for all of us in terms of how we interact on the internet, and how do we conduct business together? How do we socialize together, and so on and so forth? And every time I start to look into this, at the implications of it, it's huge for all of us.
Yeah, I have VR, and I actually have a little VR company that we make VR products. But I've been in high fidelity, and I've gone and messed around in the it's just basically an open world. But when you start interacting with like groups of people in virtual reality, they're kind of this switch flicks, and you say, oh my gosh, like it's so natural. It's almost kind of scary that it's so natural. Like you kind of walk into a group of people that are talking, and in the same way that you wouldn't just like walk into the middle of the circle and stand in front of someone and like interrupt, you kind of, ease your way into the side, like stand and wait for your turn. Like all these social dynamics just transfer so naturally to virtual reality and to high fidelity that the idea that we wouldn't be doing a podcast in the future like this, but in the near future we would be maybe sitting in some kind of really cool room together with our full bodies and all the body language and interactions going on. I mean, it's such a natural.
It would. Well, your first reaction would be to think, well, how does it work in the real world? And it would be you and I would be sitting up on a stage, on a sofa, having a chat. And then you think, yeah, in the virtual world, it's even better. You can have people floating up above you, looking down in the audience. The audience can be what it do, and you know, you can have a couple of dragons who are watching as well. You know, it's great. The lack of limitations as to how we'll be able to do this. It would not surprise me. It becomes imagination is your only limit in terms of where this could all evolve, and that's why it's so hard to predict where this is going to go. Because some seriously creative people will come up with ideas that you and I haven't even thought of, and it'll just click, and people will just go, "This is awesome. This is such a cool idea. This is how I want to interact constantly, and you know, this is how I want to do my trading of NFTs, and this is how I want the leasing mechanisms to work within that, and so on and so forth." You can see a digital economy like that becoming massive, absolutely massive. And what's so appealing about it too is that. I think Chintai is near uniquely placed to be a servicing engine for that. We're working quite hard right now on defining a standard related to leasing too, that we're going to encourage widespread adoption of. So there's going to be some publication of that standard very soon. Before it then gets encoded up, we're going to be seeking out as much industry and community feedback as we can as well. But again, this all feeds into the different stages of the project as they commence. And the advantage, I think, of having a token raise and distribution carried out over lots of months like this, in the way that this is being done, quite similar to the Dutch auction style of the original EOS raise, is that it just gives people a lot of time to digest information as it comes out and watch the project, watch the team, watch the outputs or lack of, and be able to say, is this a credible project that I want to be a part of or not? And I think that's such a valuable thing versus one of these fast. In fact, this is also a reason why, in one sense, I'm not a huge fan of just these airdropping of tokens onto another distribution, because it doesn't necessarily buy you engaged users, and it doesn't really necessarily guarantee you're going to get people who want to partake. So, my wallet, for example, is full of airdrop tokens that I've never touched, just as on a personal level.
Yeah. Just quickly on that airdropped tokens and people having their wallets full of airdrop tokens, I want an app that goes in and sells all my airdrop tokens and consolidates them into one, kind of
that is a cool idea. And actually, I agree with you. That's a great idea. Because, there's a number I wish with hindsight I'd gone and sold when there was a hype cycle around them. And now I look at them and they're worth a fraction of it. It's not even worth my time clearing the wallet out in one sense. But if something was going to do it where it just took a small commission and cleared it out, great idea. I'd be all over that. And maybe you could just pick the ones you don't want to sell and actually want to hold.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but that's this big idea of just this unknown market out there, in the same way that social media was so unknown. NFTs, utility tokens, this big dynamic world that we're just kind of opening Pandora's box for. That's why I'm excited about the Chex token. That's why I'm excited about Shinty, is because it is right there at the beginning, kind of seeing the possibility and just, taking the first steps. I mean, you guys are building kind of the infrastructure to let this happen as it happens. And we have no clue what's going to happen, but it's a big idea, and it's fun to see the very beginnings of that.
Well, it's totally. And so that's been one of the challenges about trying to ensure that a leasing standard that we all agree is incredibly flexible to be able to meet any kind of behaviors and any kind of attributes within a token, an NFT, that you can possibly conceive of. And that in itself, therefore, requires quite a lot of thought about both the design of the leasing standard. It requires thought on the likes of standards like simple assets and DGoods to make sure that they're flexible as well. And then it feeds back into the underlying trading and leasing engines as well, to ensure that when you're trying to make markets in these goods, that it's not just chaos. And that, for example, you and I might go, well, I really want this sword, and there's about 6 different types of them. I need to be able to find other people prepared to lease them out and or sell them on a range of terms in a range of ways. Now, I can see lots of different ways that these things could be structured, from traditional centralized markets to more eBay styling of interfaces, to more Reddit style, whereby you've got moderators who run their own markets. There's lots of ways that can be done. They are the obvious ways to do it, because that's how things have been done in other social media platforms to date. So you just are looking at how structuring of things works, and what doesn't. I think actually, as I say, this is where innovation will really triumph, because it's going to be taking a step back and actually trying to understand the nature of these markets and what do people really want to do that maybe they're being constrained from doing properly on more simple implementations. So a good example, why did MySpace ultimately fail? Well, MySpace ultimately failed when Facebook came along and enabled people to connect with their friends, decide who they wanted to have, be able to see certain information and not, have a news feed. It did things differently from just your own space that you then had to go and manually look up and search other people in a different way. If you then look at the NFT space, it's going to have those same kind of facets of interaction and so on and so forth. If you're interested in certain types of NFTs, maybe you want to be able to see more information related to those NFTs in a different kinds of way. And if so, what would that be? These are the sorts of big questions we're asking as we work through the analysis process. But I think what will be good is, we've got some really exciting first implementations of markets that are going to be coming from, I think Scatter and Links have both got NFT marketplaces coming. And from the looks of their marketplaces, they're kind of more traditional, how I would expect marketplaces to kind of function. And I think therefore it's going to be great to see what really works for them and what doesn't in those early iterations. The one thing's absolutely sure, this space is so big, there's more than enough room for everybody in this space. So it's really just going to be a case of, I think, some healthy competition between the different ideas. And of course, the gaming companies themselves, particularly, are going to want in on this as well. So it's important to not forget that they themselves will be marketplaces of their own.
Yeah, and you already see in the NFT marketplace, with the NFT standard, you already see competition within gaming companies. I mean, you see that Mythical Games is a supporter of DGoods, and then ITM Games, who is creating their own marketplace for NFTs. So each gaming company will want theirs to kind of be the standard, and each one will try to iterate and have better UX.
Yeah. I personally, sorry to interrupt. I was going to say I personally like the Mythical Games approach more, which is to look at forming an industry standard collaboratively. Mm-hmm. Instinctively, to me, that is the way forwards, because for any markets to actually effectively interact, you really want a common standard. You see that across everything we have with technology globally, is that people eventually get together as an industry to try and standardize. So the idea of competing protocols, as far as I'm concerned, we have two credible competing protocols, which is DGoods and Simple Assets, and the best one will eventually triumph, or it won't even necessarily be the best one. If you look at the VHS Betamax history of technology, it's actually the one that gets the widest adoption that will most likely be the one that triumphs, although hopefully it's also the one that's strongest. Yeah. So from Chintai's perspective, we'll support all the major protocols in those early days, and we expect a consolidation into one over time. And I think this is all part of a healthy growth out of a really interesting sector that's rightly getting a lot of attention.
Yeah. Now, what's the main difference, would you say, between DGoods and Simple Assets?
Oh, I'm probably not best to comment right now, because I think they're both at a point where they both got very well defined phase one protocols that are out there. There are a range of differences, I think, in terms of how they're looking to implement. And there's going to be, for example, a distributed MSIG related to Simple Assets, of which EOS42 is also one of the MSIG signatories on that. But whereas the DGoods perspective is this idea of a debt and a token. So really, they're giving everybody everything they need in terms of core functionality to do transference and trading of the NFT itself through callable functions, and you just literally deploy the open source code into at the token level if you wish. Now that's kind of cool as a concept. What it doesn't do is make markets, however. So if you think about what that practically means, it means it's great if I happen to bump into Brandon in the virtual world, and Brandon bumps into David, and I say, hey Brandon, I like that virtual hat of yours right now. How much do you want for it? And you say, well, you can borrow it. You can lease it off me for the next 2 weeks. That's great. But what happens if I want a hat and I'm around in the virtual world and there's no one around. This is where market making happens. And you say, well, actually, I want to know all the users who are currently, out there with a hat like that, of these characteristics, and are available to either buy or lease on these terms. And that's the market making engines that are going to sit as another level alongside the protocols and the standards. And this is why it's all very cool, because we're going to see really great innovation that goes alongside that, I think. And again, Chintai is unusually well placed, I think, with its market making and order matching engine to actually assist with a lot of this processing. And I hope, therefore, that we'll be in a position to announce some good commercial partnerships in this space as a result of that too. And that's all going to feed into the roadmap and the delivery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and on that roadmap also, I see that it looks like over-the-counter trading in the future.
Yeah, so
go ahead.
Yeah, well, over-the-counter trading is effectively bespoke trading. So that is something that's actually ready to go for EOS CPU leasing already. The thing is, of course, that the deployment of the REX, and Dan was very clever with the design of it, because what Dan was able to do is by making changes to the system contract is get around some of the challenges that every other application has. And it's meant, therefore, that it hasn't really scared off whales going into the REX and using the REX for the first time. The reason that the OTC market was originally envisaged was a way to enable whales to lease without remotely surrendering custody of their tokens, because that was a valid concern that everybody would have when you were over certain holdings. But actually, it now has massive applications instead for a range of other markets instead. And the OTC market also has a range of applications for NFTs as well. So luckily, we built the engine. It's ready to go. It's just that we don't think there's sufficient demand for it on EOS in terms of the EOS token itself to be worthwhile deploying. What we're instead focusing on right now, incidentally, is we just deployed the automated leasing service. So if you ask, well, what does that mean? What that means is that the next stage of resource management on chain is to remove any interaction with the chain whatsoever. It's, there was a time when we were all religiously having to keep an eye on the amount of CPU we had staked in our EOS, and it was starting to impact just basic functionality at the peak of the CPU boom. Now we're at back to the point nearer like the network launch itself, whereby no one cares anymore. Doesn't matter if I've got 10 EOS staked or not, and there's usually spare capacity in the network. This is great. But actually, it seems reasonable to assume as the economy in EOS grows again, that we will start to see certain pressure points and times again. And when that happens, this is where an automated leasing service, particularly for businesses, becomes an essential thing. Because what it's going to enable them to do, and people that sign up, is that they don't have any kind of fees upfront at all. All that happens is that it enables them to put in an amount of EOS, a bit like you would make some money available for your electricity bills on a monthly basis. And you don't worry about whether or not your TV or any other electrical appliance is going to be supplied with power. It's all supplied by the provider, and you just pay a bill at the end. So now, the analogy, therefore, for you as an application running on the EOS mainnet, it goes back to the end users. And particularly if they're in things like gambling, you don't want them running out of CPU. You really want to encourage them to be your users. And the automated leasing service enables both any of your own application accounts to be watched and any users as well. And it will release one EOS to them whenever it hits a limitation point, and just gradually issues them out on an ongoing basis. Very slowly, very low cost, very efficient. It effectively means that you can put in relatively small amounts of EOS and just be absolutely certain that you and your users will never run out of any resourcing problems at all.
Yeah, wow, that's that's a fantastic foresight there again, of course. And then it looks like you mentioned the DAP Network earlier. Can you talk about launching the DAP Network and what that looks like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. At the moment, certainly EOS42 is not a DSP. So the DAP service providers are intended to be effectively a competing model, whereby they compete with one another to provide services to the various DAPs. And they do this with things like virtual RAM and eventually virtual CPU to enable mass scaling, ultra cheap of resources across the network on a range of applications. It's got the potential to be a game changer, in my view, in terms of how applications can be built on chain and what can be built on chain. So I think it's incredibly exciting. It further lowers the cost of doing business on chain and can actually remove a lot of the direct interaction elements too, in theory, as well. And now I know, for example, that EOS Nation in particular are a very big DSP already. They're doing a lot of the work, for example, for, I don't think it's confidential to name it, that the Chex raise is fully KYC. So because we wanted to be absolutely sure about the way that we followed all of the spirit of various rules globally in terms of how token issuances take place going forwards. And one of the services that's provided by a Swiss provider uses the EOS detector tool that EOS Nation built, and they are also the DSP for the KYC service for all of its needs on chain. So when I registered for KYC, incidentally, on the DAP launch, they used the same KYC provider, and I noticed a DSP related transaction on my account, which was covered by EOS Nation. So you can see already this is a live network that's active and is starting to get some traction. And I think it's great because what you're seeing is the first example of some early use cases being dominated by an early DSP. You know, they'll get some competition from others who maybe look to undercut them or provide superior services another way. And so I'm excited for the DAP network. I think it's got huge potential to change the way we do business on chain.
Absolutely. And then looking at the Shintai roadmap, on the roadmap, there's full custody peer-to-peer token leasing.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit about the impact and what that is?
So there's a couple of things there. There is the potential now with the way that we've architected 2.0 that we could actually make all of the types of fungible token leasing. So EOS is one example, fully peer-to-peer as one option if there's a high demand for that. But another is that feeds into the design of the NFT markets as well, such that it can all be peer-to-peer rather than the idea of it having to go into a centralized custodian in any form and so on and so forth. So it's about ensuring that the customers on both sides complete either a trade or a lease, and money can exchange both ways related to payment for that service or for that asset, but with complete certainty still. And that's the challenge of making this kind of activity peer-to-peer, is always been that certainty principle. Well, you know, if I offer to delegate my utility for my hat across to you, so you can use it in the game for the next month, how do I know you're not going to unstake it and undelegate if the whole thing is peer-to-peer? And that's the problem we've managed to effectively get to the bottom of and solve with some clever design. And I would say it's mostly the dev teams who've come up and solved this problem.
Killer. So that makes a ton of sense for NFTs and that type of market. It's not fully necessary for, like you said, fungible tokens like EOS. Do you see there being a demand for that? Is that something that you guys are pushing towards, or is it kind of you'll see what happens?
Yeah, I think it's we'll see what happens there, because the peer-to-peer market was intended if there was a need, but we did always expect the Rex to potentially change that dynamic of the market, and it was also conceived at a time when demand was just going through the roof for CPU and hard to foresee where the direction of that was going. We were looking at ways to ensure that we encouraged as many large token holders to step into the market and start to cheapen the price of CPU for everybody. But peer-to-peer, it doesn't really seem to be necessary in my view. I think the idea, instead of pooling the resources into a giant liquidity pool that is callable and can be delegated out to others, I think the Rex is built for commercial scale. In my view, it's by design to be the resource exchange for EOS CPU leasing. And in the future, you know, I think we've worked out ways that we can potentially leverage that liquidity for the automated leasing service we've now just rolled out and are about to start announcing a lot more details on. So that eventually it will just be that, you know, it could be whether you realize it or not, you're getting income from the Rex, but actually it could be that same token utility is then being used by the automated leasing service that we have out to a range of other custodians. The nice thing, though, about the dynamic of the free Chintai market, which is a completely pure free market, is that supply and demand will always govern and enable liquidity to scale as required. We saw that with the growth of the markets up to 22 million plus at their peak. And that definitely applies here, which is ultimately that if demand for the automated leasing service got to a certain point, the rates would simply rise. The people are definitely prepared to pay a premium for a service like that over the near-based REX rates. And it will ultimately mean that the liquidity levels would just simply scale up with that, because it will attract more people in at higher rates that are superior to the REX. So, I think a combination of the two will ultimately apply, though, and I'm pretty happy that I think we've got both, because I think it's going to give some really good options for both businesses and users.
So you think on the with less, when CPU usage and RAM usage isn't skyrocketing, kind of people are more likely to just set it and forget it in REX. But as there's this huge demand or there's pressure on the markets, then the free market becomes more appealing because people are getting a better return on their EOS. Is that what I heard there?
I think, yeah. Broadly, what I'm saying is that if, for example, you've got a rate of 1%, let's say, on the REX ongoing, but supply would start falling because of demand being so high for the automated leasing service from liquidity in Chintai, eventually the rate would start to go up and up. So instead, it would suddenly say get to 2%, and anybody on the REX would go, well, I can double my money now by leasing out via Shinty instead. And actually that works for me in some liquidity goes. For other people, they'd say, no, I'm happy where I am. I don't like the custodian aspect of that. I'll stick with the REX. And that's the nature of supply and demand. As the leasing rates went up and up and up, for example, in the peak, more and more people were incentivized to go in and say, yeah, right, at 40%, I'm more than happy APR to go in and take that inverted commas risk on a system that's clearly well proven with 11 BPM tick on it, on the account, and so it proved. But as I say, I think the reality is that tapping into the REX's liquidity and being able to utilize it properly is the future of this as a service instead.
Yeah, and I mean, just personally, that I went down that exact road that you just explained there. I've used both REX and Shinty at different points in the market, and just because for the exact reasons you said. So that does make sense from a supply and demand standpoint. I definitely see that happening. Can you talk just a little bit more about the using the REX liquidity for Shinty? I'm missing a part there. I'm not seeing what that. I'm not understanding that part.
So if you think about it right now, the REX pool is about 65 million EOS, of which about 2.5 million is, or maybe 3, let's say, charitably, is being actually leased out to anybody. So we've got about 62 million EOS sitting around, not actually being used for anything, but it's been paid for via the fees recycling. So the question is, well, how do we get higher utilization of that? And the answer is that actually you need more customers to use the REX liquidity. And that's what I'm talking about, the Chintai automated leasing service tapping into for additional liquidity too. So what it may do is that it eventually will have competing sources of liquidity. And Shintai's got its own liquidity sources too. If they're cheaper, it'll draw on that first, and then if it needs to, it can draw into the REX's liquidity as well. And it will simply just get the optimal pricing and the cheapest EOS possible for the end customers as part of the automated leasing service and that fire and forget service that it's provides. And it can effectively infinitely scale with this too. And it's probably worth mentioning that Chex is integrated into this service too. So this then is one of the first integrations of Chex starting to be built in. And this is going to be a gradual, continuous process over time as it becomes more and more integrated into this whole ecosystem to build out.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And this gradual process is cool to see each little step happening. And then looking down the road, another reason I'm excited about Chex is just this vision of in the future possible, bond type markets and future type markets. And, the vision is so dynamic. There's so much going on there long term. Do you want to talk about bonds or futures or what the possibilities?
Yeah, well, there? Absolutely. So the futures market, or it may be options is the better word for it. They are envisaged for the mature final model. And what does the final model mean? What do I mean by that? What that means, right now you have an environment where if you were to put in, say, 10 Bitcoin and invest them out across a range of tokens, let's say you put them into the DAP Network, into EOS, and into several others, during that period where you're leased out, you're the owner of those tokens. So what you expose yourself to is conversion risk. So all the markets as they gradually deploy are going to be exactly like the EOS one. They're going to be native to native, which means you go in with EOS, you get EOS back out, and you lease in EOS. And the same will be for the DAP network. So we can facilitate the transference for them via a variety of different means, but it's not fully automated. Now, the reason we're doing that is because to actually then do the full model, which is that there is Chex being the full conversion layer between all of these different tokens, and there's a range of huge efficiencies from doing that. You have a continuous liquidity pools of different tokens. You've got Chex also being used as pairing between these as they take place efficiently within these cross markets. But to remove conversion risk, you need access to an options market, which means that for a small insurance fee, you can completely lock yourself in and come back out at the exact same price you went in at. So if you want to lease out 10 Bitcoin, you need to be able to insulate yourself, if you wish, from conversion risk. And to do that, you would take out an option. Now, what that means is that there's going to be Chex holders on the other side who are effectively going to be largely Chex whales who carry out the insurance market and fill the other side of those orders ongoing. And sometimes they're going to lose, but most of the time overall net, like any insurance market, they're going to win. Because the way options pricing works is it's linked to volatility of token pairings. And so the long and short of this is that as we get to that mature model, the options market will build out and provide yet another passive income source for Chex holders, that they will be able to sit there and also cover the conversion risk for other users. And sometimes, the majority of the time, the other holders are going to find the fee for that conversion risk coverage is not worth it versus the actual change that took place. But sometimes they'll find it was absolutely great. But like you and I pay for travel insurance, 90% of the time we don't ever use it, and every now and then it works out and you say, well, I'm kind of glad I had it. But I like the idea of not having that exposure. But there's insurers on the other side who their job is to take that exposure and they make lots of money from doing it. That's the nature of how you cover conversion risk in this very large market, where you're pairing out and enabling people to realize passive income across these ranges of sources. So that's one side of things. The other is the DAP bond market, which is a way for providing additional financing for crypto companies that are more established projects that have got credible teams and businesses and so on and so forth. They don't always want to be able to be necessarily selling equity and other things like that. They sometimes just need to access working capital and a range of things, a bit like the way corporate bonds are issued now. So for us, we have most of the mechanisms to do that already, and have secondary tokenized bond markets where you can trade based on face value that generate out continuous payments of interest for borrowing these funds, and over time the crypto company would pay it back as part of that, or maybe issue out a new series of bonds to pay off the original holders and so on. That's not the problem at all. The deployment of this as a concept, it is getting the regulatory oversight for a market of that nature. Because when you issue tokenized bonds of that nature, they have most definitely have got legal implications as well. So we want to make sure that we partner with a financial regulator and ensure that side of the market is going to be very different from other maybe financial products you've seen to date. There's going to be a range of individual investors who are maybe more sophisticated in their nature. Some of them may be more institutional, and that's going to help bring much bigger investment capital into the crypto space in a more legitimate way that's more measurable for people too. They'll be performance linked as well, so you're not going to see these sort of scammy over promises. You're going to see people being judged ongoing for the quality of their raises, and they won't raise if their reputation is low quality. And you'll see gradings of these bonds in the same ways you do in the real world relating to one company or another. The quality of your debt is directly linked to you as a team, and so on and so forth. So that's also therefore in progress as well as a project. A lot of it's right now in the interaction with regulators globally perspective to work out who would be the best regulator to oversight these markets. We've also got some talks with a couple of VC funds about partnering on that as a venture, which I'm not certainly making promises on any level. That I'm just explaining what's going on. So we've got talks with regulators globally and talks with some VC funds that are interested in what this potentially means from a range of levels, as either to invest in or as in be funders for these bonds or certain other kind of support services they could potentially offer. It's exciting, it's very interesting.
I mean, there's like every kind of fork down the road that you take, there's this long 5-year, 10-year like possibility that's just amazing. Whether it's through leasing utility tokens and how big that is, and NFTs and different markets, and just these passive income streams. I mean, it's very almost overwhelming to think about all the things that your team's up to. So it's really cool. And the Chex token, a very, very cool concept. I'm going to keep following that closely. Was there anything that we overlooked or kind of breezed through as far as Chex token or Shintai that we haven't hit on yet?
Not at all. I mean, I think it's just going to be good for the community, hopefully, to watch the project unfold now over the next 6 months. The advantage of doing this slow distribution, it finishes, I believe, on the 4th of December, the daily issuance, is that it gives people time to assess us as a team and us as a project and the progress and the potential of it. And I think that's great. Unfortunately, it does exclude people from China and the US, the race. So that's unfortunate, but that's the nature of the regulatory environment we're in, where certain governments are not giving clear enough guidance for us to be able to go that route right now. But on the flip side of it is that it's not going to stop people using Shintai either way, and the Chex token and its inherent utility are going to be accessible regardless to people. So it's a bit like the fact that you for example have and use EOS fairly regularly, right, Brandon? You technically didn't get hold of it in the auctions, though, right? It's the same kind of nature, though, that once this tokens themselves, governments want to kind of control the dynamics of this stuff, but it's impossible to fully control it. All we can do is ensure that the issuance of tokens is fine. Somebody asked on a channel and said, well, does this mean I can't move my Chex tokens to another wallet? And the answer is, of course you can. This is a public blockchain. You can do whatever you want once they're actually issued to you. They're your tokens now. Yeah. Nobody controls and nobody tells you what you can do with them. So off you do as you wish. And that's the nice, liberating reality of this environment we're in, where anybody can move anything to anywhere. And again, it doesn't stifle creativity and the way we all interact with one another.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be careful how I word this, but actually, I won't even say anything.
I know what you were probably going to say.
Yeah, freedom. You're called EOS42 freedom, and I did end up getting my EOS, however that ended up happening, and it's a public blockchain, and so the regulatory environment needs to be kind of obeyed. And also
it does, but I will say one final thing on that. The SEC get a lot of stick, but the SEC's primary concern is very similar to the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, which is that they are primarily concerned about stopping fraud and stopping tax evasion and stopping bad actors from interacting in the financial system. So I don't think anybody can blame them for looking with a great deal of concern at this. This anarchic system that's evolved where there is no control, and being slightly fearful of how this is evolving and trying to work out how do we protect US citizens, but also how do we make sure that this doesn't turn into a money laundering opportunity for everybody in some fashion or whatever else. And the same could go for drug money and all sorts of other things. So there's nothing wrong with them being a little cautious and maybe slower than those of us in our space would love to see them speed up and mature their thinking in a way that enables US citizens to go through a KYC procedure like this and participate in a raise like this and whatever. But I think that's all going to come over time once the likes of the SEC get comfortable with the definitions and get comfortable with certain degrees of control and maybe not having control over certain things. And but they'll get there. I think that will come over time as as projects and blockchains mature and the individuals within these agencies observe behaviors and decide, okay, the scammy behaviors and worst practices we saw in 2017 are not being repeated now. We're seeing more intelligent management as they follow the rules of other global regulators. I think, therefore, we're happy now putting in these sets of rules for the US too. I think that's where the US will gradually go. It just isn't going to be leading in this space in terms of regulation.
Yeah, and you look at to the SEC's credit, they have stayed out of the way to some extent, and really the only companies that have actually gotten slapped at this point are kind of egregious scams. So
it is. It's been pump and dumpers who bypassed and didn't do things like any kind of checks on who was investing on what, and they tried to massively overhype it, overstate it, or downright didn't deliver anything. They published a white paper. They made misleading statements to people. They sold them up the road, sold them some lemons, and then disappeared off. And is it really a surprise that would be considered fraudulent behavior in any industry? So it absolutely should be in this space too. And that's good that their focus is that. And it goes back to what I was saying, that they genuinely, the top focus of all the big regulators is protection of consumers as the driving force here. And I know it's always tempting to get the conspiracy theory, big government stuff going in, and it's all about control, but actually their job is to be there to oversight the conduct of participants in the investment markets in some fashions. And the ICO is obviously being innovative, but its total lack of any kind of controls around it is probably something that is going to be it needs to be kind of a right middle ground needs to be found, and that's why these exchange raisings are another alternative proposal for that, where you've got some sort of environment that adds a bit more structure around it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that, and for all of us in the space, most people in the space now, this is building slowly a very strong base to actually build this grand vision of freedom. And, that doesn't happen by trying to, being too overt about it, let's say. We can slowly build this wonderful free system the right way. And so, I appreciate your part in doing that. And we're going to probably, me and you will see each other soon. I'll be in Washington, D.C. for the June 1st announcement, which is going to be epic. And then the Tulip Conference is coming up, which is the 1-year anniversary of the launch of the EOS chain in San Francisco. So tons of block producers and a bunch of the teams that launched the actual EOSIO chain last June all did that from San Francisco at the Tulip Conference. And that's happening.
Super cool.
Yeah.
Yep.
That'll be really fun.
That's right. But by pure luck, I remember I was talking to G. Siverlingham, who is one of the primary organizers of Tulip back then. And I remember when he was talking about dates for the first Tulip conference, and he wanted it to be on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of June. And I said, look, you don't want to do that. I said, because EOS is launching on these dates. Little did I know. And so, I tried to get him to go for the middle of June, and the best they could get was I ran about, I think, the 8th, 9th, 10th of June. And as it turned out, we obviously had those delays during that period after the launch before we actually launched the mainnet itself, and the launch date actually was bang on the Tulip conference itself as a result.
Yeah, that ended up adding a ton of excitement to that conference, because all the block producers, or a lot of the block producers, staying in one house in San Francisco, it turned into some sort of like cool hacker den from a reality TV show. It just turned into a giant sort of libertarian weed smoking, philosophical discussion thing. And a lot of kind of open discussion with people you've been working with for 6 months, and were randomly meeting for the first time at this point of the network launch. It was just very strange. What was interesting is, of course, most of the technical members of each team were not there during that point. They were all manned on station, ready for the network launch, and so on and so forth. But yeah, it was a phenomenal one. And there is actually going to be another BP kind of house just like that as well. So I'm staying at that one, because the organisers were very kind enough. They thought it worked so well last time, they were going to do one of those again. So it should be fun. It's killer. Yeah. G's awesome. We we've hung out quite a bit, and look forward to the Tulip conference. So if people are in San Francisco, or if you want to come into San Francisco, if you're a block producer, or if you're just interested in coming to the conference, it's going to be not only EOS.io. There's going to be a block producer summit, but before that, there's a whole emerging technology conference that's going on the few days before. Then we're going to have the block producer summit. So what's the place for people to find tickets to that if they want to come? Do you know the website?
Yeah, I don't. I think it might be tulipconf.com, but I'd have to check. Apologies.
If you Google Tulip Conference, it's not, people don't need a web address anymore. Just Google Tulip Conference. It comes up right at the top. And I'll put the link in the show notes, but we will be there. A lot of people will be there. And any final thoughts on June 1st as we start to wind down here?
Well, I thought Enrique, who does the DAP Stars feed, he's a legend in terms of keeping everything fully up to date. But he came up with that. I don't know if you saw it. I wouldn't call it a conspiracy theory video. It was an analysis video on whether or not it was all was it Facebook and Telegram related stuff. And it was really quite compelling, his linkage of all these different ideas. But I love the way it elicited a response from Dan within about 15-20 minutes saying, let's not set expectations too high here, I just thought that's a great way of saying, look, it's not Facebook and it's not Telegram. So if I was to guess, based on everything that I can see, it seems to clearly be pointing towards a social media network, which makes perfect sense because Dan's got proven form launching a successful blockchain social media network. It's a huge space. There's huge demand for it. They know what they're doing. They've got the perfect platform to do that and deploy that on. Be very interesting seeing whether it's on the mainnet or whether it's a different chain, a separate EOS.io chain that's going to be doing that, and so on and so forth. But I think the most important thing for me is that I think we're about to see the deployment of the first really, really big EOS-based application, as in huge. And you can tell that it could be, if it's a social media one, it could in a second wipe out the Telegram groups as we know them now, as those the main way of interacting, certainly in the West. Could be everything moves across onto this new social media platform very, very quickly. And we find that our discourse suddenly upgrades a whole other level whereby, what I've long complained about is so many great discussions in the governance channels and everywhere else. It's just, it gets buried under that timeline of comments, and you just can't search that previous great content, analytical debates, everything else. And we've lost that historical record that we had on the Bitcoin forums. Satoshi's comments, you can go back and read these amazing debates. And I don't, it's a shame, but I don't think we're ever going to be able to see a way of pulling that back out of Telegram and putting that into a readable format for people, because you can bet in 10 years' time, I think there will be people wanting to reference back to the EOS launch and say, oh, that guy who's now a gazillionaire running a massive corporation, he was part of the EOS launch. Looking back through his comments, oh, wow, look at this interesting debate he had back then with, somebody else who's also now done this and this since. And so I'm hoping that if it is a social media platform, it's kind of a massive upgrade on both the content potential of Steam, but realistically, you've got to fancy they are looking at the likes of Facebook with a cryptocurrency embedded into it and trying to say we could do this much better without the censorship, without the privacy issues, and so on and so forth. And I'm hopeful we're going to see something to become maybe the first big social media platform launch since Steam. I know there's some other smaller ones that have launched in the mainstream too, but this could be the first big cryptocurrency social media platform.
That is my hope as well. And what was your take on them unstaking their? What's your conspiracy theory on them unstaking their tokens aside from voting?
Well, they did say it was for strategic purposes. So that strategic is a very broad term, and it doesn't really tell us a lot at all. I think my best guess is simply that they are looking to move it across to another wallet to use for voting, if I was to guess, to start participating in the network governance. I don't think it's for anything more than that at this stage, personally.
Cool.
Why would you? I mean, they've already confirmed they're not going to sell it. So if you think about it, they're not going to sell it. Logically, they're going to be utilizing the CPU if they need it. Not obvious. I mean, maybe it's a stake for the mainnet to stake ready to use for the social media platform.
Yeah, that's
set
a possibility.
aside 10 million. Yeah, could be that combination of voting and setting aside of staking. If there's ever one company that doesn't need to borrow from the Rex right now, it's probably Block One. So
yeah, I mean that's a good point. If they are launching some sort of just huge marketing campaign with a social media site, they're going to need a lot of CPU and RAM to facilitate, make sure nothing, people aren't having to, if they're staking on behalf of all the users, possibly. It's an interesting take for sure.
That's just not it. I'm guessing as much as anybody. It's just but it will be fascinating to see what they've got coming. And I think Block One always interests me as a company because they do a lot behind closed doors for a transparent blockchain. They themselves tend to keep the cards close to their chest. But I think part of the reason they're doing that is they're working towards a fairly coordinated master plan that they don't want to really reveal too much about until it starts to become. Because I think the reason they don't is that the sorts of companies they're looking to compete with, it would be a disadvantage to reveal their strategy just yet, if that makes sense. So I think whatever they're working on are going to be different components of a wider strategy that will become apparent much more clearly as they start to deploy them one by one. That's what I think.
Well, that's immensely exciting. I can't believe it's finally here. Like within less than a week, I'm getting on an airplane and going to Washington, D.C., and we're all going to get an answer as to what is going on. So the wild speculation is fun, but that moment of actually realizing what they have planned is going to be that's going to be a blast. I can't wait, man. Can't wait.
Yeah, or it'll be something that you'll go, oh my goodness, is that it?
Yeah, I know. What if it's
that's
just
what Dan seems to be worried about now. He'll be like, when Google, when Telegram, when Facebook deal? What do you mean?
Yeah, I know. I know. Yeah, there was. He also said no government partnership. So, the DC thing. The DC thing is just seems like maybe more of a just a statement. A statement location as opposed to anything.
Well, isn't it? I think I've heard that they're building or they're relocating Block One's headquarters to DC, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
exactly. So I think that's the reason for choosing DC as the location. It's going to be their new headquarters in some fashion. So makes sense.
Which which does make a statement that they're going to work closely with regulators and try to have something that's very mainstream and usable for the U.S.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So I think if you look at Block One themselves, they obviously raised a lot of money at the height of the ICO boom, but they didn't set out to do that. They set out to do a raise during the ICO boom, really presumably to cover the costs, the huge upfront development costs they put in to build out EOS itself. You had a massive team based out of Blacksburg and other locations building around the clock for the best part of probably about a year. That's not cheap to do that with developers of that quality. And so it's an entirely justifiable one. And if you look at that as a project, it's fully delivered on the white paper and has continued to be built out and maintained over the last year. So the good news there is that, that nobody can well, I suppose some haters could, but nobody can claim that they're some sort of fraud and didn't deliver on what was promised in the project and the white papers. So I think you're right. It makes perfect sense to me now that if you're now looking to take EOS.io to the next level, it needs legitimacy. And for that, you need to get buy-in from global stakeholders on a range of levels, government being one as well. And it's trying to make them understand that, this is a platform for everybody to leverage. This isn't meant to be just for the EOS mainnet. It's not meant to be just for a small exclusive group. It's open source, and anybody can spin one of these chains up and use it for private means, for public, for some sort of in-between models. You can configure it any way you wish relatively easily. And that's, I think, the message that they gradually have to break down over time and will through usage use cases. And that's going to be interesting because at that point, that's when we see lots of chains, lots of need for new block producers coming in and teams that can really maybe out that bit hungry and want to compete and provide better services. And we might end up in that world of lots of chains all trying to out-compete each other for economic business, which is super cool because that's kind of, for me, free capitalism at work in a way that's just raw and creative. And I'm feeling excited now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's the biggest idea that's the most commonly overlooked is this idea that like block one is just one company operating within this space. They're like they could be not, they're not, there's so much focus on block one. EOSIO is the technology that's been unleashed to the world. EOSIO is this platform that anyone can come build on. There could be 100 block ones. There could be thousands of block ones someday. EOSIO is its own separate entity that gives this potential for massive amounts of competition, massive amounts of free market creativity, just this huge tool that's been given to the world. And them going to Washington D.C. and just openly like kind of giving it to the government as well. They're like you said, brashly proving their point. Like anyone can use this. Even the U.S. government, if you want, can use this. Everyone, here's a new thing. Go out and build stuff with it. It's a killer big idea for sure.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about it too is that block one, of course, may not even become the largest business on there by any means. I mean, you can see a time conceivably where they managed to attract a very large player in from the technology sector because they realize that what is the point of us building an entire new protocol that does the same thing as this? And especially when we can configure this to our needs in any way, shape that we wish. So examples would be, a great example is looking at something like Kik. So Kik were spending a long time building out the KinNet token and various things related to that. Actually, in reality, what they could have done is taken an instance of EOS if it had been there for their own network to service their needs and plugged into the wider EOSIO system. Now, that's one example. You could see the likes of Microsoft looking to leverage the technology for their own needs as well. Why would you need to be messing around with Hyperledger and its high costs and low performance levels when you can just take EOSIO, fork the code base, make a few amendments, and sell it as an ongoing package to commercial companies for their own needs in some way as private blockchains? I mean, the great thing about this is that it could be used in any way by anybody in theory, and it will all plug in over to this wider collection and network over time as well, which is where I think I start to then at those moments see why people talk about this being the effective new internet when you get to that point, because you can just put everything onto different chains in that theory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love the idea also of every community, every network having their own little dynamic, possibly even separate token for all these different networks, because communities on the community level, there's a lot of dynamics that aren't fully suited by whatever ways we trade right now. So it's almost big picture. It almost takes us full circle back to like the barter system where everything except with full liquidity, where everything is just tradable within your community and outside your community and worldwide and globally. I mean, it's the neo internet is a interesting concept to try to start to wrap our heads around, and how value is exchanged peer to peer, because for so long now, for thousands of years, basically since the invention of money, we've needed some sort of intermediary to facilitate all these transactions. And all of a sudden, real peer-to-peer transaction with liquidity globally, with NFTs and everything is just kind of a crazy idea. So EOSIO is that.
I suppose the only thing we haven't touched on at all in this whole conversation are DAX as well. So the one thing that I think we might see the real rise of over the next couple of years are going to be more and more of these decentralized or autonomous company communities building and developing out in a variety of ways. It's going to be everything from certain applications will maybe go that route, could be more block producers go that route, could be whole chains that end up getting implemented with more DAP-like governance features in them as well. And that's really interesting, because I think then again, we could find that it challenges our perceptions on how each chain should necessarily behave and how the dynamics could work in this. Because we talk about communities, and it could be that some of them don't even have a community in the way we know them now as well. So it's going to be, like everything else, it's going to be super interesting, right? I think if we were to fast forward 5 years and look back at conversations like this, we'll kind of smile because we say, oh yeah, well, there's so much ahead of you guys. You had no idea what was coming. And it really does, those moments you think, man, I feel like I'm in 1994 with the birth of the internet. It has that same feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's exciting times. And this, and we're a week away from even a big culminating event, hopefully. So again, a plug for the Tulip Conference. Look up the Tulip Conference. Come hang out with me and David in San Francisco and a bunch of other block producers. If you're going to DC, you probably already know about it. And where's the best place for people to find out about the Chex token auction and Shintai?
So the best place to go for information about that is Chintai.io, and from there you can find information about the Chex white paper, the tokenomic model. You can also access the Shintai exchange, the version 1 that's currently up. Version 2's new UI is about to deploy in the next few days as well. So that's going to be super cool when that's up. And yeah, absolutely. From there, anybody who goes through the KYC process as well, welcome to then, in theory, take part in any of the 18-hour releases that take place on an ongoing basis through to December the 4th. Nice thing is that we've tried to build the system out to smooth all these price spikes you see in other auctions, so people have the option to just go in and average in over, say, 20, 30, 300 rounds or whatever it is, and just get an average price, which I think is always quite a smart way to do these things as well. So it's been good seeing the response so far from people has been great, and I'm excited to see how the community responds when we start to give a lot more detail on the progress, especially on the NFT side of things.
Well, I'm a U.S. citizen, so unfortunately it's not a super straightforward process for me. I might just have to wait for checks, but I'm excited about the project. It's really cool. Very, very exciting future as well. I mean, we start going down this rabbit hole of how big of an idea it is. It's just, Chex is a really exciting project. So can't wait to see what happens.
Nice.
On my end, this is the EOS podcast, my EOS podcast friends. This is actually the EOSwriter podcast as well. We're partnered with the EOSwriter, so if you've probably seen them bouncing all over the social medias and with a really good quality curated some of the best information about EOS. So check out the EOSwriter, check out the EOS podcast, check out hybrid.games. Scott is not only a computer engineer, but also a software engineer, and he's building this really cool idea called hybrid.games, like bringing some of your sensory into games on the blockchain. So fun idea. So check that out. And David, thanks for coming, man. I appreciate it. EOS42. Everyone vote for EOS42.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
I should probably say that as we've dropped out the producer zone. Yeah, I mean, I haven't sort of said something like that since almost the launch of the network. But yeah, I mean, voting is incredibly important. So I think it's great to see the higher level of voter engagement we've got across the network now. And I would just say that if anybody is a holder and isn't currently voting, I would encourage them to take a look at things like the Rex, pick a really good proxy if they're not sure who to go for, the likes of Freedom Proxy and Luke Stokes' proxy, amongst the many others that have maybe good value sets that are good for them. And I encourage them to find out a bit more. But it's just really important on a network like this, one way or the other, to try and have your voice heard. And it's all proportionate to your stake. But that doesn't matter. The important thing is make your voice heard and make it heard, because every amount makes a difference, and it's good for the network's health that we have active voters. So whatever else, I hope more people do continue to gradually come in. Absolutely. Well, EOS42 has my vote. If you're voting individually, vote for EOS42. And that's the show, my EOS podcast friends. Thanks for stopping by, and cheers. Good having you on, David. Thank you.
The money is not the prime asset in life. Time is.